Well, it's election time, and this year we are electing all the seats in the House of Delegates and some very important offices in our city. This year, we will elect or re-elect a new Commonwealth attorney here in the city of Norfolk. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for our 2025 election primary preview show with our Commonwealth attorney, Ramin Fatehi, Commonwealth attorney for the city of Norfolk. Again, thank you so much for joining us, as you always do on this beautiful Sunday. We've had a little rain throughout the week, but, you know, when the rain comes, it washes a lot of things away, and it also gives life to everything that we see outside so it can spring up. So we thank goodness for this first day without the rain, and we thank you for tuning in, as you always do, as we broadcast from none other than the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nations, none other than WSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. So, as I mentioned before, for those of you that are joining us throughout this time of May and also June, we've had our 2025 election primary preview show. That's right. In this primary election, we will be choosing, you the voters, statewide, various offices throughout the state for our House of Delegates, all 100 seats, for those individuals that you want to run to represent your party, Republican or Democrat. And we also are choosing the candidates that you want to represent you and your party in the general election for some very important offices in our cities here in Hampton Roads. We've had before candidates for treasurer at Newport News, and now we have candidates, Commonwealth's attorney, for the city of Norfolk. I want to remind you that the primary election is June 17th, but early voting has started already, and you can vote early all the way up to June 14th. That means after today, you have 13 more days to go vote early. Go to your clerk of court's office, voter registration office, wherever it is in your jurisdiction, and vote early. And you can still register. Well, you can't register voter for this one. However, you can still register vote for the general election, which is November 4th. So again, the primary election is June 17th. You can vote early up to June 14th. Make sure your voice is heard. So, as I mentioned before, we are now going to have candidates that are running for your vote to represent the Democratic Party in the general election for Commonwealth attorney for the city of Norfolk. And I'm so glad to have on the show my friend and our Commonwealth attorney for the city of Norfolk, no other than Mr. Ramin Fatehi. Attorney Fatehi, how are you this Sunday morning?
Dr. Clavel, I am doing great. It is such a pleasure to be back and speaking with you and with everybody on Hot 91.1.
Absolutely. Well, listen, election season is here. You've been quite busy, you and also your challenger, making the rounds and making sure that people know that you're on the ballot. How's campaign going right now?
Campaigning is going great. It is always a pleasure and a privilege to be out in the community and speaking with my neighbors here in Norfolk. And for me, you know, campaign season actually isn't a whole lot different than the rest of the 4 years I've been in office, because, you know, being in civic leagues, being in church, being at community events is part of the job. And so I've been doing it all the way through.
You know, before we get into, you know, your time as Commonwealth's attorney and the impact your administration has made and some of the issues on the ballot, I want you to talk to the people about the importance of the Commonwealth's attorney. Why is it important to go out and vote for the Commonwealth's attorney, and what does the Commonwealth's attorney actually do here in the city of Norfolk?
Commonwealth's attorney is the only part of the justice system that we as Virginians get to vote for. We're the chief prosecutor, or as I like to think of it, the chief minister of justice for the people in Norfolk's criminal courts. And we don't get to vote for our judges in Virginia. We don't get to vote directly for our laws, but we do get to decide how the prosecutor administers justice. And we do that through the ballot box. You know, my office in Norfolk is one of the biggest and busiest in Virginia. We have, out of the 120 Commonwealth's attorneys, we're the sixth largest office, 40 lawyers, 45 staff of paralegals, victim advocates, secretaries, And we handle 4,000 cases a year in the courts, primarily felonies, but also some selected misdemeanor cases. So it is vitally, vitally important for us as citizens to know who our prosecutor is and what sort of justice that prosecutor is carrying out in our name.
So with that being the case, how has your time been as Commonwealth's attorney? I remember, the forum that we conducted here as part of the People's Voice in conjunction with WNSB Hot 91. And it was we had a long-term Commonwealth's attorney that wasn't running for re-election, retiring from the job, and the slate was open, and you came out the victor. So tell us a little bit about your time the last 4 years of being our Commonwealth's attorney.
Yes, I remember that. I remember that forum well, though it feels like a dispatch from another world. It was over at New Hope Kojic, and we were all masked and social distanced. And while all that feels like a bad dream, it was only 4 years ago. And I ran with the blessing of the previous Commonwealth's attorney, Greg Underwood. Greg had asked me to run, and he said to me, you are a progressive prosecutor, and I am. And he said, you understand that the system treats black and white people and rich and poor people differently, and I want you to do this. He had said that to me years before I ran, and I thought it was a crazy idea, but I prayed over it. I talked to my wife, and I ran. And I said then, and this was not just COVID, it was the George Floyd era. And, everybody's acting like black lives no longer matter or that DEI is somehow a bad idea. And that black lives still matter. DEI still is a good idea. But I ran against an opponent. I had two opponents, but against one opponent who was supported by all of the power players in Norfolk. The big donors, the people who are part of a political club here that I was never part of. And I said I'd focus my office on violent crime and holding accountable people who are killing our brothers and sisters, and that I would not repeat the mistakes of the crime bill, mass incarceration, super predator era. So that message resonated. People voted for that idea. And I've had a 4-year experiment where I've been able to show that we can have criminal justice reform and greater safety, that we don't have to choose between our public safety and our civil rights. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done over the last 4 years.
When you talk about it was, DEI still being a good idea and social justice being a progressive. Tell us, what is the difference between a progressive attorney, Commonwealth's attorney, and a non-progressive Commonwealth's attorney? Because some people may have the misconception that being progressive doesn't mean that you're not hard on criminals, but you're rather smart on criminal justice. So can you talk to us a little bit about the difference between being progressive Commonwealth's attorney and a non-progressive?
Sure. It's in a lot of ways the difference between being a progressive legislator and being a non-progressive legislator. A progressive prosecutor like me, we believe that we should do the things that actually make us safer, not the things that we perceive that are going to make us safer, because often the things we perceive increase safety actually harm safety. And we are driven by data. The criminologists who study this, who study crime control and prosecution and arrests and policing, what their data shows actually works. And then we also recognize that the system has delivered injustice for pretty much the entire history of the United States, and that the fact that we've had a two-tiered justice system, one for the wealthy and connected and one for black, brown, and broke people, means that people don't trust the system. And when they don't trust the system, they don't call the police, they don't serve as witnesses, they don't serve on jury duty, and violent individuals go unpunished, go unarrested. So healing the harm that the system has caused by being transparent, by being honest, by being available, and then by saying this particular thing I'm doing, whether it's a decision to prosecute a given case, whether it's to seek a certain sentence, isn't driven by Old Testament justice. It's driven by this idea, this data. So that is the difference. And the irony is that, if we're driven by data, that shouldn't be political, but we live in the Trump era. And we live in with the last 50 years, even before Trump, in the so-called war on drugs, the war on crime, all of these things that were really racially coded attacks not on public safety but on individual, or that were attacks on individuals disguised as public safety.
Absolutely. So, with that, what's been some of your success stories? What's been some of the community impact of your administration actually operating in that particular ideology?
How much time you got? I'm really proud of the work that we did. As I mentioned, this was sort of an experiment because I came in the middle of a violence spike that was fueled by COVID and by the Trump administration's malpractice during COVID, where they kept, bars and liquor stores open, but they shut down schools and rec centers and other places where young people could be. And I'll tell you, what we saw was an increase in the violent crime rate to numbers we hadn't seen since the late 1990s. And I came into office, as I said, with the opposition of a lot of the city grandees, but with the support of Congressman Bobby Scott 4 years ago, who there isn't a man in America who is smarter on criminal justice than Congressman Scott.
Absolutely.
The man who voted against the crime bill when the majority of the Congressional Black Caucus voted for it in 1993. So he knew then and he knows now. But I came under pressure, and especially there was a spike in violence downtown. And heaven knows in Norfolk, if it happens downtown, that's the center of the universe. And people started calling me up and said, Ramin, hey, it's hot out there. You need to walk back these criminal justice reform promises. You need to get tough. You need to send a message. And I explained to the people who called me that get tough and send a message is completely unsupported by the data. Sending a message doesn't work. Get tough in quotation marks means tripling and quadrupling the sentences of people beyond what they deserve to try and reach somebody else out in the street. It doesn't work. And I said I wasn't going to follow their orders. I was going to be the independent elected official that Norfolk, made me to be, and that I would continue doing what I said I would do: focus on violent crime, build community trust, and call out the fact that environmental factors were driving this crime spike, and that when COVID subsided, the crime would subside too. So what I did, I started going to every every murder scene in Norfolk. I started going to every murder scene in Norfolk with the prosecutor who would handle the case, day or night. I started going to every police shooting scene in Norfolk because I am an independent watchdog over the police. And after those police shootings, I've held press conferences to explain whether I was going to charge, and if not, why not. I have been involved in community events, everything from supporting our violence interrupters to supporting our local leaders who are running youth diversion programs. And I have done something that a lot of people think progressives can't do or won't, which is build a relationship with Norfolk police and to have them tell me who Al Capone is, so that when they catch Al Capone, whether it's for gangsterism or for tax evasion, I can deal with him. And thereby to be able to say the vast majority of those 4,000 people who come through my office do not need to be hammered. They can be. We can try and address whether it's mental illness, substance use disorder, homelessness, whatever it is that is the root cause of their problem. So the successes are that what we see now in Norfolk is from 2022 a 42% drop in homicides, a 40% drop in violent crime, a 27% drop in property crime. Even shoplifting, which has been in the news, is down 17% this year. And at the same time, we've seen the population of the Norfolk City Jail drop by half over the last 10 years. And we have seen that, with the exception of one person, not a single child in Norfolk's courts has gotten an adult prison sentence to serve.
Wow.
So I've effectively shut down the pipeline sending Norfolk's children to adult prison. So I can't take credit for the crime numbers going down. Prosecutors who are honest with you will tell you they can't affect the crime rate up or down. But what I did do is show that you don't have to choose between public safety and civil rights. You don't have to choose. We had a declining jail population and declining crime rates, greater fairness, greater transparency. I could talk about the legislation, the fact that thanks to both Don Scott and Bobby Scott, we now have money for the first time in Virginia history for witness protection, because I went to my friends and said, will you do this for us? And they said, we will. And Norfolk is the home of the Norfolk Four and of a police detective who, in disgrace, went to federal prison for bribes. And I turned over and have turned over 200 of that detective's files to UVA Law School to review them, and held a press conference saying I was going to do it. So I want to tell you that I drove down the crime numbers. I can't. That's not what I do. But what I did do is prove that the devil is a liar, and that anybody who tells you that you got to choose between safety and civil rights, safety and human dignity, safety and fairness, safety and treating kids like kids, doesn't know what they're talking about or aren't leveling with you.
It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric Clavell, and you're joining us for our 2025 election primary preview. Here today we have with us the Commonwealth Attorney, Ramin Fatehi, for the city of Norfolk, talking with us about his impact on the community during his first term in office as our Commonwealth's Attorney. Election is June 17th. You can vote early now up till June 14th for this primary election for the city of Norfolk and others that are on your ballot in your jurisdiction. Attorney Fatehi, you mentioned that there was pushback. What type of pushback did you receive from your colleagues or even the public in general when you decided to pretty much operate the Commonwealth Attorney's office in a progressive way by following the data as opposed to the perception?
The people who were against me 4 years ago remained against me. I reached out to some. I will give credit. There were some folks who were against me, and I reached out and was able to build relationships with them, and they are not against me now. But there were a lot of folks, folks who are Fox News enthusiasts or who didn't read past Leviticus in the Old Testament, or who just have sort of 1990s ideas, who were convinced that I was a one-man crime wave and that I was legalizing murder, and they weren't interested. And what they eventually did is they went out and recruited somebody to run against me. In the face of all of the progress and success that we have here, and you would think that with crime numbers down and the jail population being down, everybody would see this as a good thing. But there are people who are out there saying that, oh no, it's World War III out there in the streets of Norfolk. Don't bring up any kind of pesky facts that would suggest otherwise. And we got resistance in other quarters. There were members of the judiciary who would try and get in the way of some of the things that we were doing, which was nothing new. Under my predecessor, Greg Underwood, when Greg decided that we were going to dismiss marijuana possession cases because in a city that's 50-50 white-black, and in a city where white and black people use marijuana at the same rate, 80% of marijuana possession defendants were black. So we had to take them all the way to the Virginia Supreme Court because the judges wouldn't let us dismiss. It wasn't all of them. It was a select few of them. But we effectively had to sue them. But you see this with progressives all over the country. When prosecutors want to use the hammer, nobody questions them. Everybody says, well, they must be doing their jobs over there. But the minute the prosecutors say, hey, this particular hammer that we've been hitting people in the head with is counterproductive and harmful, and we're going to stop using it, all of a sudden there's all kinds of resistance.
What would you
all
say?
kinds of resistance.
What would you say to those that say that this particular style, even though the data justifies the results, to say that you're not you're treating more of the victims as the champion for criminal justice as opposed to, well, actually not the victims, but you're championing the criminals as opposed to the victims.
Yeah, that's absolutely false. Show me the conservative prosecutor who got a Virginia Witness Protection Program funded. That was a progressive measure, championed by Don Scott and Bobby Scott. So for anytime somebody starts talking about victims in a prosecutor's race, that's like shouting "All lives matter" when somebody says "Black lives matter." It's code. I go out to every murder scene, and I stand over the bodies of our neighbors, and as I stand there and as I hear the people on the other side of the police tape, who are often the mothers or the sisters of the person who is dead, and I hear their wails in the middle of the night, I think about that victim as if that victim was my child. And I think about it as, what if this were my brother? The suggestion that being progressive somehow means we don't care about victims is absolutely obscene. Yeah. It is obscene, and it's cynical. And I'll tell you, those same people who talk all day and all night about victims, they use them. If a victim says they want blood, they'll give the victim blood. If the victim says, I want something restorative, I want mercy, then they say, you don't know what you're talking about, and we got to protect the community. So it's always a one-way street. Now, I've been a prosecutor now for almost 20 years, and the way that people use victims and use victims as political props is disgusting. And I care very deeply about our victims. That's why I believe in increasing community trust. We live in a country where for every 100 murders, only 60 people are ever arrested. The increasing community trust, making sure the system is fair. In the end, my hope is that number may increase from 60 to 61 or 62, so that there is one more mother out there who doesn't have to wonder who killed her child. That is the progressive way, the building of trust, the use of data is itself a way to honor victims. It is to take them seriously as human beings and listen to them instead of using them. And in doing the things that will actually make them more safe and will prevent future victimization and will make sure that we have fewer victims in the long run.
Absolutely. And I bring that point up because a lot of persons, as you stated, believe that if you're not tough on crime, then you're weak on it. But from what you just articulated and from the data, being progressive or smart on crime actually is being tough on crime.
It's being tough on the right kind of crime. The criminal justice reform progressive prosecutor answer to murder is prison. There are certain crimes where a prison sentence is the only thing that's appropriate. But that doesn't mean that just because you have a hammer, everything's a nail. And one of the great sins of the mass incarceration era was treating everybody like Al Capone. And what that did was it hollowed out neighborhoods. It hollowed out families. It cost us $40,000 to $60,000 a year per person incarcerated. And it took fathers, because people in prison are disproportionately men, disproportionately black and brown men. It took fathers out of communities. So that by courtesy of the government, the streets wound up raising another generation of children. So, the work that we do as progressives is recognizing that prison is the answer to a limited number of questions, but it is absolutely not the answer to the vast majority of them. And if we really care about a safer world, we should be using prison a lot less, not a lot more.
Absolutely. Well, listen, the time is now to go out and vote. The people have heard from you. You've been out in the community. You've done some town halls and debate just recently. Let us know just a few issues that you believe are on the ballot and why voting is so important for this election for Commonwealth's attorney.
It's really a matter of both public safety and civil rights. And the importance of the Commonwealth's attorney's race, you can see in who is involved in it and the money. My opponent has raised so far $500,000 from developers and corporate lawyers and a whole bunch of other folks. I am fortunate that I have the endorsement of Congressman Bobby Scott again for re-election. Don Scott has endorsed me again. Mark Herring, my opponent's former boss, has endorsed me. And independent thinkers like Algie Howell, Paul Riddick, Andy Protegiru, Rodney Jordan, Yvonne Wagner, my progressive colleagues, the Commonwealth's attorneys in Fairfax and Arlington and Prince William and Albemarle. But what's really on the ballot is, are we going to continue to have a system that treats everybody fairly, or are we going to go back to having a two-tiered system of justice, one where the size of the bank account of the guy making the phone call may wind up having something to do with your brand of justice? It's also the Trump administration. We're a military town. We have to defend in depth against Trump. And the last line of defense between, women who have to seek an abortion and their doctors and the federal government, the last line of defense between domestic violence victims who are undocumented and ICE, the last line of defense between teachers and local officials who want to defend DEI is your local prosecutor. That's what's on the ballot. And our voters here in Norfolk have a choice between me, and I'm a fighter, and I am a man of unbending principle, and somebody who has sort of come out of nowhere and is not a progressive, talks about having a 100% conviction rate, and who voluntarily took a job in the Trump administration and is running in the Democratic primary. And it is a stark choice, and one in which we have the Trump administration demolishing every single thing that reduces crime, from early childhood education and Head Start to Medicaid to federal jobs and the federal workforce, which means the era of dropping crime numbers may be ending. And you don't need a progressive prosecutor as much in the good times as you do in the bad. Because if it turns into 2022 again, thanks to Trump, Norfolk needs protection, from those mass incarceration ideas. And that is what I've always pledged to do. I will always follow the data, and I will not buckle to panic or to collaboration or to surrender the way that so many other politicians in America, including a lot of Democrats, have.
Absolutely. Well, in our last few moments, and I'll give you the last word, tell us why. You've given us the issues, you've given us your track record, and you've given us your passion on why you want to continue to do this job. So tell our voters, why is it important to reelect you for the next 4 years for our Commonwealth's attorney?
It is because every time we vote for a prosecutor, public safety and civil rights are on the ballot. Every time. And Norfolk, all of our crime numbers are down. Our jail population is down. Everything that we are looking at says that Norfolk is moving in the right direction, and we are living, breathing proof that progressive prosecution and civil rights are compatible with public safety. And we need to send a message to both Virginia and America that we understand this and that we support these ideas and that we cannot go back to the 1990s.
Absolutely. Once again, thank you so much for joining us as we are in our 2025 election primary show. Make sure you go out and vote. You can vote early up to June 14th, and the day of election for the primary is June 17th. Thank you so much, our Commonwealth's attorney, Ramin Fatehi, for sharing your time with us. Tell us where listeners can find more about you and your campaign.
You can look for me at FatehiNorfolk.com or on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, or X at Fatehi Norfolk.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us here on State of the Water, where we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to the community. Until next time, be good, be great, God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.